Hello, comrades. Breana here. Welcome to another episode of Signs of Breana. Signs of Breana is a collection of musings, dreams, and dialogues documenting one person's path towards elderhood, liberation, and
Hello, comrades. My name is Breana of Signs of Breana, and I want to share a little bit about Capitalism Harm Reduction, which is my theory of change, and share where it comes from. I'm from a mixed class background, and each one of my parents, three, I was raised by my grandmother, and also with some connection to my mother and my father, and each one of them had like a very distinctly different experience of class, or still do. My father was in the military and is a Teamster. He's been driving short distances for a trucking company for 25, 30 years. And so he has this connection to labor that's sort of vintage, right? Like you work for one company and you work with them until you retire. Like that's his experience of like laboring and being in solidarity with a union. And my grandmother was a single mom and worked in the service industry, and then was able to find her way into foreign exchange She was a foreign exchange broker. I couldn't find it. It's too early in the morning to find it. And so she went from being able to, it really changed my family's life. Her ability to go from being like a single mom, working evenings and service job, to a professional class job. And maybe like, at the time it was like middle class, upper middle class. And she did that job, I'm not sure for how long, but she was disabled out of the workforce. And by the time I was born, I'm older now, I'm 37, than she was when I was born. When I was born, that was like kind of the end of her career, and not too long later, she was disabled out of the workforce and was on disability for, I think I was probably from age like 3 to age 17. And she had a doctor that worked with her and said, like, you're not able to work. She lives with both back injury and back, like genetically, things that she was just happening in her body. And so she wasn't able to sit or stand for a long time. And she had a doctor that worked with her. And then one day, her doctor retired or moved, and she got a new doctor, and her doctor said, this new person said you can work, and her disability was taken overnight. And finally, my mom was always like someone who did odd jobs and worked here and there, cut people's hair out of the kitchen, and she lived rough. She was unhoused for at least the last 10 years of her life. And she would often like care for elders under the table. And so like my experience of being working class is really an amalgamation of like these three humans and their labor experience. And so like a good millennial, as I was graduating from high school, I was like, and now we go college. Doesn't matter which college, we go college. And then I went to college, and they're like, so how you gonna pay for this? And I was like, what money? What is that? And they're like, well, you can have these student loans. And I was like, what is student loan? And they're like, oh, well, you'll pay it back later. And I was like, sure, later. When's later? They're like, sign this promissory note. And I was like, anxiety, sweating, underarm rank, just like signing things that I didn't understand as like a 19-year-old. And when I graduated from college in 2011, there was not a lot of economic opportunity. You know, when I was in college, I worked retail and I got my degree, and I graduated from college and I worked retail. And I was like, wait, but they said that if I went to the college and I did the college, that on the other side there would be the job, and the job would have money and benefits, and then the lights would stay on. And none of that seemed to be the case. And thankfully, I had a family friend who was like, hey, I'm leaving this job and I need to train someone who I can trust to do this well. And that's how I got my first office job. It wasn't like through an internship. There was no like, I don't know, it was like the off-ramp to college was a cliff. And I worked this office job, and I worked in legal administration, which taught me so much. And I worked for a prisoner rights attorney. And I think there's so many women in my career who have invested in me, who have seen something in me, and like taught me a practical skill, taught me how to make a guide, taught me a little bit about operations, about training, about how to talk to people, and encourage them on a path towards something that we're doing together, you know? And I think I just want to shout out those women, because they are many. Ariel, Renee, my auntie Breana has cared for me so much in that regard. Amber, my student worker job in Paris. Maya, who taught me about intention setting. But I found myself in this professional sphere, working this job, and since I was supporting a prisoner rights attorney, I would take calls from women, mostly. Grandmas, moms, sisters, spouses, girlfriends, of men, black and brown men, who were in detention and carceral facilities. And they were trying so hard to get supportive representation for their family member. And I remember the retainer at the time was like $4,200, and they had to pay half just so that their family member could be seen. And for this attorney to take, to do visitation with them. And I remember women calling me and just being like, okay, I got 500 today, and I'll call you next week with another 200. And then I have a family member who's gonna be able to slide me another 7. You know, like they were just like doing everything that they could to pull resources together to like care for their loved one. And it really affected me. And so I relocated, and when I relocated, I left that job and I started working in nonprofits. I worked for the Rape Crisis Center of Central New Mexico as an advocate for survivors, and then as the Prison Rape Elimination Act specialist. And so I would go into detention facilities and support survivors. I was also like offering trainings on consent to corrections officers and police officers, and I also worked at Casa Q. And so through this like collage of experiences, I learned a lot about nonprofits. And I wasn't making a lot of money, and they kept being like, yeah, because we work at a nonprofit and we do it because we care about the mission. And I was like, I like the mission, but I also like gas in my Prius. Is there a way I can have gas in my Prius, occasionally take a day off, and care about the mission? And they're like, no, you should do it because you care so deeply. And I was like, I don't know, I see a lot of people out here who have jobs and they don't care at all, and they make a lot more than I do. this is trash. So I tried again. I was like, okay, that's not quite working. What am I gonna do instead? And I remember my grandma saying to me, like, if you have to be in the money to make money, something like that. And my degree is in international business. And when I graduated, they were very like, you can wipe your ass on that diploma. Like, we don't give a fuck. We're not giving you a job. So I go through all of these iterations of employment. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this corporate nonprofit. It feels like there's some more money there. I can climb the ladder. Let me climb this ladder that's made of knives. And I learned so much about financial processes, about grants, about reimbursable grants. And I learned a lot about the nonprofit industrial complex. Nonprofit industrial complex. And I found out during that process, during that stint, it was a couple of years that I worked there, that I was the lowest paid full-time employee. And the difference between myself and the CEO, like, he made 10 times what I made. And I found that so uncomfortable. Like, I'm not the least qualified person on this team. I don't have the least amount of responsibility. Why am I being so undercompensated? And the other person that was least compensated was this like black mom that I worked with. And I was just like, I'm seeing these same things like play out, like where resources go, where they don't. And that job disabled me out of the workforce. The amount of advocacy I had to do, the conversations, the truth telling where people really didn't give a damn what I had to say was incredibly impactful on my body. Even right now, I'm like, remember to breathe, stretch. Capitalism Harm Reduction was born from that season where I couldn't labor. I lost so much weight. I couldn't eat. I couldn't nourish myself. I needed help eating, and like I couldn't rest at night. Sleeping was hard. Eating, like all of the basic human functions just were so far from me. And I started to really think about like an equation, like what's the least that I can do, and not like the least number of hours or like I'm not thinking about like scammery, you know. I'm thinking about what can I offer in terms of my labor as freely as possible. Like it takes so little for me to give this and receive enough benefits, enough resources to be able to make the many systems and processes of my life move. They're well oiled and they can flow and cooperate. I think about all resources, labor, time, belonging in community, money, and how do we be in right relationship for ourselves with each of those. It requires us to know our values. It requires us to know our own no. And I think through my coaching practice, financial liberation coaching, I get to do experiments with folks one-on-one to see where's the grief, where's the shame, how can we move both of those and have more space for our agency. I'm graduating from Trauma of Money this year. I'm in their 13th cohort, and the founder talks about decreasing shame and increasing discernment, and I'm so with that. And also, there's shame and there's also grief, and there's so many ways that being poor, being working class, we're told that we're doing it wrong, that we are dysfunctional, not that the system is dysfunctional by design. And so in my practice, I work with folks to get really clear about what we have agency to care for and what are the things that we need to accept, and then come together in solidarity so that they can change. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for thinking about capitalism harm reduction for a moment. I would love to work with you if we're aligned.
Music at the beginning and end of this episode is from Kafari. Thank you to my guides and ancestors for supporting me in my storytelling. And thank you for listening to another episode of Signs of Breana.